Mexico. Again. Joaquin Guzman is the notorious drug boss who runs the Sinaloa cartel, widely believed to be the biggest supplier of heroin and cocaine in the United States. Authorities say this time he escaped through a hole in the shower area of the Altiplano prison.
The tunnel leads to a vertical passage about 10 meters deep, and it had a ladder and stairs. This tunnel has PVC tubing, ventilation, and lighting.
His latest escape, adding to El Chapo's legend. In Mexico, he's a towering figure of intrigue, the subject of books, songs, and folklore. And he's wanted on both sides of the border, in the U.S. on federal trafficking and organized crime charges. In fact, U.S. officials wanted him extradited, fearing exactly what happened. Did he pull off another escape?
Chapo Guzman escaped captivity, a prison, in 2001. He has 12 years left to his sentence, but I'm concerned about that happening again in Mexico.
Born into a poor family in the Sinaloa state when the drug trade was evolving, Guzman amassed a powerful empire, one that he continued running from behind bars after his first arrest in 1993. His reputation only grew as he spent 13 years on the run after escaping from prison in 2001, sneaking out in a laundry cart in a plot that allegedly cost him $2.5 million in bribes. He was caught and rearrested just last year at this resort in Mazatlan, in his home state of Sinaloa. Now, a massive manhunt for the cartel leader is underway yet again.
Now, obviously, U.S. officials not happy about this escape. It's clear that he was able to control his cartel from behind bars, but being outside and having and enjoying that freedom and protection from the people who work for him obviously gives him a lot more power and gives the cartel a lot more power. U.S. officials had wanted to extradite him, to bring him back here on charges and hold him here out of fear that this would happen again, Fred, and then it did.
All right, thanks so much, Sarah Gannon. We're going to talk more about this now with CNN law enforcement analyst and former FBI Assistant Director Tom Fuentes and award-winning staff writer for The New Yorker, Patrick Radden Keefe, who has written extensively also about El Chapo. All right, so Patrick, you first. Who is El Chapo in terms of, the enormity and the influence on the whole drug cartel trafficking business, and how is it he became so powerful, even behind bars?
He's an amazing character. I mean, this is a guy who grew up basically a farm boy, who by most accounts is more or less illiterate even today. He never really got much of an education, but he became, during the 1970s, a pretty formidable drug trafficker. And escaped from prison once, as we heard, and then when he was on the run, on the lam, actually really developed the Sinaloa cartel into the biggest drug cartel, I would say, in history, and became responsible for a huge proportion of the drugs that cross the border into the United States every year.
And is there, I guess, a singular, way to explain how it is he rose to the top as, the most powerful of cartel leaders? I mean, what was it about him, his influence, the way he conducted business, especially after you mentioned, he's still illiterate, he didn't have much education. What is the secret?
Well, I think he's a very canny businessman. I mean, he's been very violent, and he certainly hasn't shied away from using violence. His organization is probably responsible for literally tens of thousands of murders over the last decade or so. But he's also a smart guy who put together a very intricate arrangement. It's funny, all this talk about tunnels. Chapo Guzman, people don't talk about this often, but he actually invented the border tunnel. He's the guy who 25 years ago first thought to burrow underneath the border, and the Sinaloa drug cartel has actually dug about 100, if not more, tunnels underneath the border to move drugs. So it's not surprising when you think about it in that respect that he would use a tunnel to escape this maximum security prison.
And that is what makes this so remarkable, because it would seem the common knowledge of, the tunneling, this engineering firm associated with him for creating all of these tunnels, that the Mexican government, this prison, even though this is the maximum security, the most maximum security of their federal prisons, they would know that and then would have him in a place where perhaps it couldn't be penetrated, that, anyone working on the outside for him wouldn't be able to build a tunnel like this.
Exactly. And look, this has been a huge fight since his capture between the United States and Mexico, with the U.S. saying, basically, you guys aren't competent to hold this guy. You need to extradite him to us so that we can try him. And Mexico's saying, it's a matter of sovereignty. We really can hold on to him and we can try him here. The thing about Chapo Guzman is you got to remember it's also about bribes. This is a guy who, over the course of his career, has probably paid hundreds of millions of dollars in bribes all up and down the Mexican government. Last time he broke out of prison, it came out afterwards that he had actually there were 71 people who had worked at the prison, including the warden, who ended up being charged with custody in his escape. So I think it's very likely that we'll find out in the coming weeks, months, maybe years, that there was a very high degree of collusion with the government in his escape.
So then, Tom, maybe you can, touch on this, even more extensively, because we already have learned that 18 guards are being interrogated now. We heard that at the top of our show here. So talk to me about the likelihood of the manipulation that he may have presented that really helped facilitate his escape.
Well, I think what we see in Mexico compared to the United States is when we talk about bribery or other reasons for corruption of police officers, corrections officers, other government officials, it's on a scale that we just can't imagine. For example, we have 2 guys escaped from New York prison because they seduced a female employee and made friends with a couple of corrections officers. That's one thing. But in Mexico, what happens is that they threaten these officers, or a guy like Guzman will say, we're going to dip your kids in acid. We're going to dismember them. We're going to peel their skin off while they're alive, and they do it. And as mentioned, being responsible for tens of thousands of murders, that's nothing for them. At every level of their government, they do that. Okay. And so even a police officer that wants to be honest, or a corrections officer that has integrity, suddenly when they're faced with their entire family, their children, spouse, parents, cousins, everybody that knows them, being horribly tortured and murdered, it becomes a little bit different for them to take on and maintain their integrity.
Wow, remarkable. All right, Tom Fuentes, Patrick, Brad, and Keith, thanks so much to both of you gentlemen. Appreciate it. We'll, of course, talk more about this case later on. Also, later this hour, an amazing inside look of the safe house used by El Chapo.
We're at a secret tunnel entrance used by El Chapo Guzman in the Sinaloan state capital of Culiacan. We're in just one of 5 safe houses that he operated here, and it really enabled him to stay on the run for so long. If you take a look down into this space here, you'll see the tunnel begins and goes on for another 3 kilometers until the nearest other safe house.
And next, Donald Trump is getting some pushback from one of his